All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, Coach J.K. McLeod, kicking off episode number 266. This is going to be a Friday, might be a Friday 4 episode. If you've listened to previous Friday 4 episodes, it's where I pick 4 topics just straight off the dome and share a few perspectives, and then we call it an episode. So this is kind of quick hits or speed round, I think it would be called. I'm not going to quite call this one a Friday 4 just because I'm not sure that I actually have 4 specific things. I've really got 2 that are front of mind, and then we might just pull a couple of randoms. However, or howbeiver, as my grandfather used to say, before going any further, I do first want to say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I appreciate that you took the time to include the Help Me Understand podcast in your podcast listening, hopefully queue, because you are subscribed to the show. So hint, hint, if you're not subscribed to the show, please go ahead and do that now. Follow, like, subscribe, all those things, depending on what platform you're on. And it costs you $0.0 to do that, and it helps the show grow. So with that, first thing that I wanted to share with you was a really super short, however, kind of intriguing question that I came across on Threads. And I was talking to somebody about this recently, that going into 2026 here, I really feel like Threads is where it's at. It's the hopefully people that are listening are at least vaguely familiar that Threads is part of the whole metaverse, I guess it is at the technical term for it, where it's Facebook, Instagram, I think Snapchat. Isn't Snapchat owned by Meta, I think, at this point? And then also then you've got Threads. Threads is just a really different vibe. You can post you can post reels and things like that on there. However, the majority of it tends to be more text driven. And I'm not sure if this is most people's experience. My experience has primarily been pretty positive on Threads, and it's just a different vibe. So my algorithm tends to be overwhelmingly more, I guess, positive and focused on just accomplishments and kind of some thought-provoking questions, a whole lot of comedy, and everything kind of in between. I think some people would even label it like lots of the hope core and things like that. Be curious, what kind of experience do you have when you are on Threads? Because I know everybody's algorithm can be quite different. So the question or the post that I saw today that I thought was just a cool one that caused me to think for a minute said, "Let's be for real. What was your secret sauce to being consistent in working out?" And I thought that was a really nice and simple way to ask about consistency. So again, the question was, what was your secret sauce to being consistent in working out? And I commented, understanding that the definition of consistency was up to me and no one else. And I want to expand on that just a little bit here, especially with this being that time of the year where folks tend to re-engage, refocus, however we want to label it, some aspect of taking care of their health, their fitness, their body composition, their aesthetics, their strengths, whatever it may be. And certainly I think that there are plenty of folks, at least that I'm aware of, who are setting visions, goals, targets, resolutions. I know over the past few years, I was talking to my barber about this today. It seems like the word resolution has kind of become like the like weird relative that you don't talk about. It's like, well, I don't really want to say that I'm setting a resolution because most of the time those fail and all this other stuff. But if you are someone who still utilizes that language, then own that. Like I mean, be you, be who you is what I like to say. So do your thing. However, just this time of the year does lend itself to really trying to re-engage and refocus specifically things that are around your health and your fitness. And very often folks will have at least started to kind of veer more towards the consistency over perfection messaging. And again, this very similar how I was talking about how my experience on Threads may be different than others. My experience or my observations or my perception is definitely going to be different than others. It just, I don't tend to see, I tend to see a shift for sure out there in the world where there's more folks who at least seem to be open to the consistency over perfection messaging. And also, I think that that's something that is somewhat incomplete when you say, I'm just going to focus on consistency over perfection. And that's really where working with a coach, quite honestly, really helps, because a coach ideally would then ask, okay, well, when you say consistency, what does that mean? So when you say, when it comes to working out, I'm going to be more consistent with my workouts. So I'm going to focus on consistency over perfection. So let's say that somebody says perfection would be something like, I'm saying that I'm going to work out 6 days a week. And I know that that's just not going to happen all the time. So instead of focus on that, I'm just going to focus on consistency. Well, the challenge there is there still needs to be some definition of what consistency is. Otherwise, you can easily fall into what I'll call like the trap of just being back on that same hamster wheel that kind of ended you up where you currently are right now. So if you are somebody who is starting off the new year and saying, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm not trying to overdo it. I don't need to overwhelm myself. I don't need to go with this all or nothing thinking. Maybe you're prescribed to the something is better than nothing, like any of those things, whatever it may be that helps you get started. I'm here for it and want to emphatically co-sign, go ahead and get started. And also, as I responded on that post by saying that for myself, I'm trying to pull it back up, for myself, the secret sauce for being consistent with working out was understanding that the definition of consistency was up to me and no one else. So as you are working towards building your consistency, that is the unsolicited advice and opinion that I would have for you, is work on figuring out for you, what does consistency mean? So getting an understanding of what that means in terms of frequency, which would be how often you train, getting a idea of what that means in terms of intensity, which means how hard you train. So how volume, how often you train, and how much work you do within that session. Also intensity, how hard you train on the days that you are, for example, lifting weights versus the days that you are doing things that are lower intensity. Those things are all, to me, underneath the fitness umbrella, not just lifting weights or not just running or not just walking. To me, it all goes together. So really think through, and this is not a, sit and think before you take action. It's a jot these notes down. Keep a notes file on your phone. If you're more pen and paper or journal, each week, as you recap your week and you review the same way that you would potentially do in a business, when you go back and you review how things went over the past week, get an understanding of, okay, I worked out, let's say I lifted weights 3 days and I did 1 day of cardio. Ask yourself, okay, how did that feel in terms of being able to do that with all of the other responsibilities that I had this week? Okay, felt pretty good. Can I do more? I probably can. So I'm going to go for four weightlifting sessions, 1 cardio next week. Then let's say the next week you do the 4 weightlifting sessions, you do the 1 cardio. And when you do your review at the end of the week, you realize that I didn't recover as well. So I got 4 sessions done. However, that 4th session just really felt like it was just a slugfest the entire time. That's where then you can get an idea of, well, was there anything that was off sleep-wise? And was there anything that was off nutrition-wise? Because just because on a particular week you don't necessarily feel all that great going into that last session of the week doesn't mean that last session is too much. It may be that there are particular things that you can work on when it comes to your sleep habits, your nutrition habits, your fueling through nutrition, your hydration, different things that you can work on in order to put yourself in a position to still have a decent or better amount of energy for that fourth workout. So to someone like me, that's the stuff that that I really think is the intriguing and the fun part that I'd like to nerd out on, is getting an understanding of, okay, it's kind of like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, like how much is too much, how much is just enough, how much is too little. And that's a constant process that you take a few minutes to just get an understanding for. So yeah, just wanted to use one of my bullet points here to share that from my point of view, one of my ingredient for the secret sauce of being consistent and working out would be understanding that the definition of consistency is up to you and you alone. So even though I will say, on average, I would love to see most people lifting weights 3 times a week, then doing one more like moderate intensity cardio session per week for about 20 minutes or so, and then one shorter, very high intensity session for anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes per week. Like that's what I would love everybody to be able to do. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what consistency means for you. For myself, it's going to be more than that. For someone else, it may be less than that. And for someone else, it may be exactly that. So that's the thing that I love about taking an individual approach, is that you get to decide what works for you, because at the end of the day, you are the person that has to live in the body that you have. So that was one thing that I wanted to bring up. One other thing that I wanted to talk about here. Okay. Sorry, I had a little bit of a hiccup there. So one other thing that I wanted to talk about is kind of related to what I just talked about with consistency and really just progress and overall improvement when it comes to fitness, is a concept that I basically borrowed from this book called The Gap and the Gain. The Gap and the Gain is a book that was written by Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. And in this particular book, which is geared towards entrepreneurs and business owners, in that book, The Gap and the Gain, this is going to be my telling of it. The Gap and the Gain is about understanding that if you are primarily only focused on the gap being where you are currently versus where you want to be. So if you look forward to your target, like let's say I as a coach or I as a programmer who's putting out a training program, I want to, in my group, have 500 people doing my group training program. So that's the target that I have. If I look at that as the gap, so where am I now? Well, right now I have 10 people in my group training program, and I am well below the goal that I have of 500. If I constantly am only looking at the gap between where I am and where I want to be, then that is a quick way to get completely down on myself, feel like woe is me, feel like I'm never going to get there, just constantly feel downtrodden and like I'm a failure. The other piece of that is if I look at the gain and think back to, wow, okay, so far in 1 week of launching this training program, I have 10 people already who've signed up in the first week. So there's a gain. So it's almost like looking back, and this is just my perspective on it. Looking back, I want to take credit for the fact that I have made some gains there, while also understanding that there's a gap between where I want to be. And I think about this in terms of fitness. So yeah, it was introduced from an entrepreneur standpoint, but I think about it really more in terms of fitness. And this is a delicate dance that we can definitely play. And I'll use a real client as an example. However, I'm going to not use this particular individual's name. This particular client at times has been primarily focused on the gap. So they've been focused on, well, I wanted to be at this amount of weight loss by this particular point. I wanted to be consistently working out for this individual 4 times per week And right now I'm quote unquote only working out 2 days per week. So they were looking at the gap and very, very focused on just the gap. And they ran into somebody who hadn't seen them in quite some time and had not worked out with them in an even longer amount of time, from what I understand. And when they worked out with that person had trouble keeping up with them. And it was a realization to my client that, man, I've actually made a lot of gains over the last couple of years. I am definitely stronger. I'm definitely faster. I'm definitely healthier. And even though when I look at the gap between how many workouts I want to do per week, which is 4, and how many I'm currently doing right now, which is 2, maybe 3 on a super flexible week, that's fantastic compared to where I was before, where sometimes I might work out 5 times one week and then not again for a month before getting even one more workout in. So when I think about that in terms of fitness and progress in that particular realm, this overall just idea of the gap and the gain, I really love that. I'm not going to call it a mindset. I just love that filter, I guess is the best way for me to frame it. I love that filter of being able to look at particular situations and do that delicate dance of figuring out the right amount of focus to put on the gap with where you are now with where you want to be, and the right amount of focus and credit that you give and the mental energy that you give to looking at the gain. Like, where am I compared to where I used to be? And that can be a tough conversation for people to have with themselves, because you can easily slip into getting way too comfortable because you're like, well, at least I'm not as bad as I used to be. That's also, a quick way to become stagnant and constantly be living in the gain. Just like, well, at least I'm not doing as much as I used to, and then not continuing to try to move forward to close that gap between where you are and where you want to be. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. One other way that I was thinking about that is, for myself, when I first really got into training, I wasn't doing a whole lot different nutrition wise, but when I did finally start to do a couple of things different nutrition wise, I bought this book, and I actually was going through some old books as I'm purging some stuff to give away, and I found the Eat This Not That book. Does anybody out there remember that particular one? If you do, if you're watching on YouTube, comment, or if you're on Spotify, you can leave a comment on the Spotify thread, I guess it would be, that book, Eat This Not That. And that's where I really started. I started by, instead of trying to completely eliminate particular food groups and go with some completely whack, everything, you can only eat, chicken, broccoli, rice, although I think I did kind of try that a little bit, but I never really eliminated anything for permanently saying I'll never eat this again or never eat that again. A big part of what I did was tried to figure out, okay, how could I just do a little bit better? And that whole method of trying to make quote unquote better choices. And I am fully aware that there are definitely some things within that book, and just even some of the swaps that are made now, that some people are going to be like, well, really? I mean, swapping, for example, people will probably laugh at this particular one. I used to drink soda like nobody's business. I was drinking soda all the time. And so one of the big changes that I first made was switching from, instead of drinking soda, I started drinking juice. And for all the people that are the sugar haters out there, miss me with all that. This was back quite a while ago when I didn't really know a whole lot. All I knew is that I was drinking soda, I think Coke, like nobody's business. And then I tried to switch over to, I'm primarily going to drink water and apple juice. Every time I want to drink Coke, instead, I'll try and just drink apple juice or maybe orange juice, whatever it might be. And then slowly but surely started to find a love for water. But in my mind, I was doing better because regardless of what the sugar content was, I wasn't just constantly drinking stuff other than water. I was drinking not a whole lot of water at all at that point. So I say that just to say, even for somebody like myself, there was a time very early where being able to focus on the gain, I'm doing somewhat better than I was before. That was something that was helpful and gave me some juice and pardon the pun, and some momentum to really just keep going and slowly make better and better and better choices, which actually started closing the gap between where I was and where I wanted to be. So I just wanted to share that also, just this idea. And I may go a little bit further with that particular topic in a future episode if anybody's interested, just really thinking through some different scenarios and this idea of the gap and the gain. And what I'll close out with, because I didn't want this to be a long episode, so I'll close out with this. So we'll call it a Friday 2, I guess, for lack of anything better that's coming to mind. I thought about this as I was in an interaction with somebody, and they were making better, this was nutrition wise, they were making better nutrition choices in the moment than they would have previously. And something that we talked about is like, man, it's tough because it kind of sucks that unless somebody really understood how tough of a decision that was for you to make, they wouldn't really realize how much growth this actually involves. Like those little micro decisions that you make in the moment. Let's say, for instance, when it comes to movement, where it's like, you know what, I used to sit at my desk for like 5 to 6 hours, and literally I would not get up from my desk for 5 to 6 hours. And let's say that now you get up at least twice and you go for a 10-minute walk. So you get in a 10-minute walk twice during your workday versus before you got in none. It could be very, very easy to focus on the gap where it's like, man, I'm only getting in about, let's say that averages like maybe 2,000 steps during a workday total. I get in 2,000 steps on a workday. That's not that great. However, if we were to go back and look at, okay, well, what did you used to do? And it's like, well, man, on a good day, I was maybe getting like 1,000 steps in. And we're talking like during a time frame where somebody is in their office at work, not throughout the entire day, but while they're at work. And so only you, like truly, for the most part, only you, the person that's listening to this, understand how far you've come. So if you are somebody who's in that particular position, whether it is dealing with your exercise, your sleep, your nutrition, your relationships, your connections, how you do your job, a particular skill that you have, whatever it is, if you understand that if you are doing better, other folks may not and probably will not recognize that, and that is totally okay. Like it's not their job necessarily to recognize that. It is something where you know the improvements that you've made. So that's how I'll end this. I'll end this with some encouragement that as you are continuing to try and just be better, just hopefully you can be encouraged that as you're trying to be better, you may be the only person that recognizes it for a while, especially during like that transition period. Not when you just get started, but when you get to what we call like the messy middle, where it's just become kind of redundant and monotonous and all those things. Just continue to keep going because you know that you're doing better. It's way easier for others to see the gap than it is for them to necessarily see the gain when it comes to that messy middle part. So just continue to keep going. All right. With that, we're going to go ahead and end this particular episode. So if you do have comments, questions, feedback, ideas for future show topics, all that stuff, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me on Instagram at Coach JK McLeod. That's spelled MCLEOD. You can also email me, jk@jkmcleod. Again, MCLEOD is the spelling.com. So jk@jkmcleod.com. All right. Thank you again for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I truly appreciate it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.